King Lear is the play that we're studying now after Macbeth, and I did it for a very specific reason, and that is because they seem to me in some ways to be good counterparts, although it was written a few years after Hamlet. This is written in 1605, King Lear was, although it was revised later on in 1622. And it is, just like Macbeth, a dark play. In fact, it's one of Shakespeare's blackest tragedies. It does not, the resolution of the plot, which is characteristic of all Shakespeare's tragedies, is here marked by the untimely death of perhaps one of Shakespeare's most beloved characters, Cordelia. So it's a very dark ending. And it is one of the most eventful and all-encompassing plays by Shakespeare, for that matter, and probably most closely follows the model of the tragedy that Aristotle laid down. It is also based on sources that we can trace, British legend and folklore, in this case Holinshed's Chronicles, which I've mentioned a few times before, which came out in 1587, not long before Shakespeare is writing these plays, like contemporaneously with the early ones. But in the ending to that story, Cordelia survives and marries Edgar, so that's a happy ending. Shakespeare decides to deviate from that, and that is what makes it such a black tragedy, that exact thing. Because we love Cordelia for her love of her father and her unwillingness to compromise at the outset, and so her untimely demise at the end is a bitter one. There's also a play that came out called King Lear in 1594, and the Lear, though, there is spelled with an I, which essentially sticks to the story derived from Holinshed. So it has the happy ending. Shakespeare decides to deviate from that. This is 11 years after that performance. So the death of Cordelia is really pushing tragedy to its limits. And for that reason, it is a very challenging play, emotionally and otherwise. It's not a problem play. It's still a tragedy. There's no sense that it's could be anything other than a tragedy. There aren't marriage scenes at the end. It's a pure tragedy, but it's one of the darkest ones, and it questions whether there is actually providence, which seems more strongly affirmed in other plays. Here it suggests there's a suggestion of, even in the outcome, when order's been restored, there's something broken that can't be fixed. Right? It's not so satisfactorily. You leave there feeling a hurt that doesn't go away. I'm going to submit to you, and this is not my idea. It's an idea that's been floated by many critics for a while, but I think it's too infrequently asserted. Although actually this first bit is my idea. I think it is a Christian play about a pagan world in the same way Beowulf is a Christian epic set in a pagan world by a Christian author. So some of you, I think most of you, read Beowulf in first year. I certainly dealt with it, and I know others have. The setting is clearly in a pagan world, but the author and his Christian faith is speaking into that and commenting on it. So the narrative gloss on the play makes it clear of the author's thinking on that, but the actors in the play seem less so. The famous Victorian critic, actually post-Victorian, but A.C. Bradley, Four Tragedies. He talks about the four tragedies that we're looking at, actually. So Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello, four great tragedies. He notes this. He says that the references to religious or irreligious beliefs are more frequent than is usual in Shakespeare's tragedies. So it's more evident, the religious aspects in this play, and yet it's clearly set in a pagan world. So what do we make of that? Because in Macbeth, as we just saw, this is a highly religious play written by a Christian playwright in which Christian themes and ideas are in the forefront. Right at the outset with the witches and the speaking of providence and the themes thereof, they're starkly evident. I don't think it's in the background, it's in the foreground. Even the characters are speaking in such terms, whereas here it is not the case. In fact, so when Lady Macbeth invokes evil forces, we can see them as the powers of hell, and we don't need to. There's no barrier to that. Whereas here in the play, King Lear, it is not so, and each character in Lear, there is no religious orthodoxy in King Lear, first of all, and each character creates a religion that's based upon his own nature. So it's a reflection of his own personal character and nature, and those vary from character to character. And I will get to that when we look to it, but they differ quite markedly from some like the King of France, who seems perhaps the most Christian of the characters, to King Lear, who might be the most pagan, which is interesting in and of itself. But the word nature is prominent in the play. Repeated plays on this word nature, and there are various meanings attributed to nature. And I will look at that. And in King Lear, I would say that nature itself is questioned. Human nature, the nature of nature. These are explored by different characters from whatever vantage point the character's own natural inclinations gravitate towards. So it is a dark, but in some ways a very philosophical and even religious play. But again, set in a pagan context, whereas again, Macbeth was not so. So it's still looking at religious themes, but now setting it in a different way, and as I say, much like Beowulf in that sense. So it is a play at the same time, and this is a setup for the play that will follow this, Hamlet. It's a play very much about the human mind and about consciousness and moral awareness. So there's a lot of madness. The theme of madness is very strong in the play. What do we mean by madness? Remember, of course, we just saw that Lady Macbeth herself went mad. What does it mean to go mad? What exactly does it mean? I mean, in our day, there's a great deal of discussion of mental health. A great deal. Without a great deal of definition of what mental health actually is. You need a definition of what health is before you can diagnose an illness. What does it mean to be healthy? And if you don't have an operative definition of that, you can't really diagnose the troubles with that. Shakespeare certainly has a sense of what that constitutes. He presents it very richly, not just within the mind of the character, but in relation to of an individual character to other characters in the play. So proper social relations, also the relation of the character to so the political order, and also in relation to God, and also in relation to a clear sense of what C.S. Lewis calls the Tao, natural law. To deviate from that is madness. So that's a definition of insanity of a sort. So you break that law and it breaks you. That's a law you can't break, but you, in the attempt to do so, to circumvent, as we saw with Macbeth, when he violated the clear, bright line of moral no-nos, you must not do this, as soon as he did that, he became increasingly reckless of consequences. But at first he was very aware of this. I dare not cross that boundary. And once he did so, he feared he lost his soul. But then he became morally reckless, or reckless of all danger at that point, whereas his wife, who initially said, ignore that, think not upon that, it will make you mad, she is the one who goes mad because she can't stop thinking about it, because her moral awareness grows over time, even though she rushed into these. So what I'm submitting to you is that he is exploring similar themes here in King Lear, just coming at it from a different angle, in a different setting. And so in this play, it begins literally with a sort of madness, and it's presented on the political scale. A king willfully divides his kingdom in three. Now, in political thought, this sort of act would be considered to be civil war. But here it comes from the lawful ruler. His decision is to divide his kingdom up into three. This act in itself would be seen by Shakespeare's audience as an act of madness. No good can come from this. But when the play begins, there's no sense that the king is actually the way we see him in Act 3 on the heath screaming at the elements like mad, lost his senses. He seems sane at the outset, but the act, the political decision to divide up his kingdom, and moreover on the basis of what the daughters will say about how much do you love me, that's the basis of the decision. So it's like an old man who wants to feel loved, and he's going to reward you on the basis of what you say. And of course, some of them are willing to lie, and Cordelia won't, even though she's the one who loves him the most, and vice versa. So it's also a play about love and the right ordering of love in relation not just to personal relationships, but also to principles such as justice and truthfulness. And the sisters, Goneril and Regan, could be seen as Machiavellian. Once again, unprincipled, willing for the sake of power to say or do anything, and yet appear to be virtuous, willing to do that. And of course, we loathe Goneril and Regan for their treachery, which ends up being a boundless act. In some ways, they become like Macbeth, immoral characters. So we see that the order of nature goes wrong right in the beginning of the play. When the political order is broken, the natural order will soon follow, in the same way it happens once again in Macbeth. There it comes when a king is murdered. Here the king destroys his own kingdom by a legitimate decision, but very similar in that sense. And the order of nature only goes wrong, or at least becomes visibly, manifestly broken, when, again, the king is outside of all trappings of civilization, on the heath with the wind blowing, and he has lost his mind. And that's again in Act 3 at the worst point in the play, when it looks like all is lost. So, in that, the question arises, is Shakespeare making a statement that this is wrong, that what King Lear decides, is this a wrong thing, or is the point of the tragedy to show that the results of the order of nature gone wrong? Is it a political act, or is the natural world out of whack? What I mean by that is, normally Shakespeare has a very stable sense of political order, moral order, etc. In this play, he pushes it to almost suggest that the world is not as stable and orderly as it ought to be, because once again Cordelia dies. So as I say, he's really pushing tragedy, and remember, tragedy is marked by chaos, and disorder and anarchy, here it gets pushed to the point where even the restoration of order isn't really quite the neat conclusion that some of the others are. So Act 1, Scene 1 is the fulcrum for the whole play, and the error that Lear commits is fundamental to the events that occur thereafter. What are they? Well, it's a twofold error. One, he decides to abdicate his throne and divide it in three, which is a crime against reason and a crime against the natural order, because remember, he remains the father in possession of his faculties, even though he is an old man. But even if he does seek to abdicate, he can't divide it in three. He has to pass it on to one of them, because the kingdom requires a unity. You can't have three heads. Anyone who studied politics and history would know that never works. Like Shakespeare's audience would be thinking of what happened with Julius Caesar when the triumvirate succeeded him and then soon plunged Rome into civil war until one of them emerged triumphant. That would be at the forefront of their minds here. That's the first order. The second is almost worse. So that's the political act and the act against natural reasoning. The other is he rejects and dispossesses his beloved daughter, Cordelia, which may be more monstrous, over a trifle that he sets up as the test of her love of him. And it's a stupid test. So he dispossesses her and accepts Goneril and Regan, even though those two sisters are clearly unprincipled, and he doesn't even care for them particularly, and yet he's willing to give them all. And then, to compound his two errors, he puts himself under their care, and he has no person who will look after him in his dotage. Cordelia has no means of looking after him now. The one person who would have taken care of him now can't. So that's the tragedy. Everyone loses full possession of their faculties when they get old. These days, we live in an aging society, very, very common. People are becoming older and they're still alive, and they become dependent on the younger generation. They ought to be looked after. Well, now he is being looked after, but by people that don't love him. By the way, these two errors, that of abdicating his throne and dividing it in three, and dispossessing Cordelia and giving power to his other two daughters, these are linked. The connection is clear. So there's a political error and there's also a domestic error. They're linked, but Shakespeare always presents them as linked. It's part of the bond of nature. And it's also an aspect of what I had said to you in a previous class about Shakespeare's understanding of kingship, the king's two bodies. And I mentioned this work by Kantorowicz, called that very thing, The King's Two Bodies. And it's a study in medieval political theory, and the idea that, and we understand this in even to this day, when the king dies, the king lives. The king is dead, long live the king, right? And then the king, you take the crown, you've seen this in movies at any rate, you take the crown off the dead king's head and you pass it on to his successor immediately, because there's never a kingdom without a king. A kingdom requires a king, and the king requires a kingdom. Well, what's he going to do with his crown now? He's going to chop it up? There's no peaceful transition of power and authority. It's been divided up before he's even dead. And so the king's two bodies refers to the body of the man who is the king, in this case Lear. Lear the man. He is a man, he has children, he has family relations to them. On the other hand, he's also the head of the political body, which is, in this case, England. He's the head of that body, and he needs to act in that stead, and he will refer to the whole kingdom as his body. And all of the metaphors that are frequently used by Shakespeare of illnesses and sicknesses and needs for the purging of political dissent and so forth, those are metaphors of the body in reference to the king. So the familial order is connected to the political order. King is the head of the family, he's a man, but also the king as the head of the political order. Those are indissolubly bound in Shakespeare's thinking. And therefore, this is what explains people make fun of King Henry VIII, probably for good reason in many ways, but he is absolutely obsessed with having an heir. Because if he doesn't have an heir, a legitimate heir, then England will descend into civil war. And civil war is the worst plague that can beset a nation, the absolute worst. Like King Henry was not unstudied. He was a Renaissance man. He knew the consequences of not bearing a lawful heir. So he needed to marry somebody who would have a child that he could pass the crown on to. Like whatever else you want to think, the 6 wives and all that sort of stuff. But his concern about having an heir was a legitimate concern politically. And every king would be concerned with this. So with those things in mind, the scene begins. It's Kent, it's Gloucester, it's Edmund, Act 1, Scene 1. The subtext here is that there are, I think you need a sense of that subtext before you can appreciate the play. And the subtext is that we have an old man, probably 80 years of age, who is never been a wise man. He's a foolish king. He's long-standing. He's beloved by some, but he's never been a good ruler, and he hath but ever but slenderly known himself. As I believe it's Goneril that says this. He's never understood himself. He's always been impulsive. Even though he's 80, he's always been an old fool. Even when he was young, he was a fool. Now he's an old fool. And the sisters, even though they're the beneficiaries of his dividing of the kingdom, they are astonished at how foolish that it was to dispossess Cordelia, because she loved him the best and always treated her. And of course, they knew she deserved that. But they're opportunists. They come in and they're going to take the spoils, of course. But that's in the backdrop, and the figures that are represented here, Kent and Gloucester, are interesting characters, and Edmund, because their different motivations will be revealed. These are all three not primary figures in the play, and yet they're essential sub-characters, all three of them. So let me read a few of the lines here. But there's a background here. There are different motivations and feelings motivating the characters in the play that are really presented quite openly at the outset of the play. And so Shakespeare interestingly opens with Edmund, who is one of the blackest villains in Shakespeare's plays, being given a grievance, a legitimate grievance in the audience's eyes for his actions that will soon transpire. And what are these? So Kent, who remember is the good servant of King Lear, he said, "I thought the king had more affected the Duke of Albany than Cornwall." Gloucester, "It did always seem so to us. But now in the division of the kingdom, it appears not which of the dukes he values most. For equalities are so weighed that curiosity in neither can make choice of either's moiety." So, in other words, the king is going to be equal in his treatment of everyone. He's not going to treat people in accordance with how they have acted. He's decided at the end of his days that he's going to observe the principle of equality and ignore merit. That's exactly what's been said there. We're going to be fair. We're going to create a little game which one of you loves me the most? And on that basis, ignoring all history, all relationship, all past allegiances, we're going to have a game, and you will all have an equal chance of winning this game. Now, note when Gloucester says this, his speech is disordered. He's troubled by what he's hearing. Because, of course, Gloucester himself is a nobleman. And this is not right. That equality should be the principle that determines what happens here. It ought to be based on, at the very least, merit, but certainly natural right would be an aspect of it. Remember, I said it was a pagan setting, however. So there isn't a sort of a law of primogeniture or something, so it passes to the firstborn, nothing like that. Anyway, Kent, is not this your son, my lord? And then Gloucester, his breeding, sir, hath been at my charge. I have so often blushed to acknowledge him, that now I am brazed to it. I cannot conceive you. Sir, this young fellow's mother could. Whereupon she grew round-wombed, and had indeed, sir, a son for her cradle, ere she had a husband for her bed. Do you smell a fault? In other words, he had a extramarital relationship with Edmund's mother. In other words, he's a bastard. And by the legal definition, he is an unnatural son. He's not the one who will be recognized legally as having any connection to the father. He admits that he is connected to him in his breeding, in that aspect of his nature, but he doesn't have a legal standing. He's no legitimacy in the eyes of the law. He's an illegitimate son. This is a grievance on his part, right at the outset. And his father is very callous about saying it right in front of his son, furthermore, and making fun of it. Anyone who had a sense of propriety, I would say, would not be saying such a thing in front of their son, right? Or care or love. You would not do such a thing. So again, immediately we're given a sense of Gloucester's character, and it's not a likable character in that sense. Kent, I cannot wish the fault undone, the issue of it being so proper. Kent, very gentlemanly. That fault I can't wish undone, but he is such a good-looking and well-behaved young man. So, good recovery. Gloucester, but I have a son, sir, by order of law, some year elder than this, who yet is no dearer in my account. Though this knave came somewhat saucily to the world before he was sent for, yet was his mother fair. There was a good sport at his making, and the whoreson must be acknowledged. Do you know this noble gentleman, Edmund? So again, the son's a whoreson. It was good sport when he was conceived. And here he is. And he must be acknowledged. So it's just, again, it's just, can you imagine the son? His blood's boiling. But of course he's putting on a face that he's not upset by this, of course. He has no ground to stand on, legally speaking, so he's going to behave well in his father's presence. But underneath that, there's a subcurrent of resentment, which is about to bubble over. Do you know this gentleman, noble gentleman Edmund? No, my lord. My lord of Kent. Remember him hereafter as my honourable friend. My services to your lordship. Now, if you're Edmund in this, how do you play Edmund? How do you convey to the audience that you are well behaved and look the part, and at the same time the resentment which must be boiling in you? How does the audience see that? That's the acting bit, right? That's difficult. Do you even reveal that, the resentment's there? You probably don't. You would have to do it very subtly, because again, the two men to whom you're speaking can't see it. So how would you do that? Again, that's up to the actor. Yes?
Something that's interesting to me from a history standpoint is he would think that he was doing him a favor by acknowledging him.
Yes, he could. That's correct. So Gloucester thinks that he's doing him a favor by acknowledging. He must be acknowledged. He is condescending because really he's just a bastard.
An unacknowledged bastard is even outside.
Lower on the set, right?
It's even lower. It's even outside of
He has no legal standing at all.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got nothing. And yet Gloucester is acknowledging him, so Gloucester thinks he's doing him a good turn. So what is in question thereby is the how lawful the law is. How good is the law at doing the three functions of the law we talked about at the first time? 1, restraining sin. 2, pointing us to Christ, acting like a pedagogue. And 3, being a thing that will lead us in godly behavior. Is the law really doing that here? Now remember, I said it's in a pagan context. It's a Christian author, clearly, but the context is thoroughly pagan. Are the laws that are protecting this, are they really helpful here? Again, but you're right, Gloucester thinks he's being kind. He doesn't need to do this. Edmund thinks a little otherwise. It wasn't done. Right. So he thinks he's doing him a fair turn, Gloucester, to his son. I think we have a stronger sense of the legitimacy of the grievance on Edmund's part, because we have a stronger sense of the rights of an individual before the law than even Shakespeare's audience had. They have a stronger sense of the communal good than we do. And the reason I say that is we could be minded to think that Edmund is anything other than the blackest villain. I think Shakespeare wants him to be pretty unsympathetic as a character, but he has some grievance. He has to have a grievance. It's the thing that motivates him to act as badly as he does. And when I say, otherwise he just doesn't make sense as a character. And what we said about Shakespeare is he's so good at representing characters. He's a thoroughly plausible character. Thoroughly. So he says, so my services to your lordship. Kent, I must love you and sue to know you better. Sir, I shall study deserving. Gloucester, he hath been out 9 years, and away he shall again. Sound of a senate. The king is coming. And now there's somebody bearing a coronet on some sort of cloth or something like that, or a pillow. And then King Lear, Cornwall, Albany, Goneril, Regan, Cordelia, and attendants. So the whole court comes in, the king and his 3 daughters, and the husbands of Goneril and Regan, and then a variety of courtly attendants, courtiers. Lear, attend the lords of France and Burgundy. Gloucester, France and Burgundy, we're about to find out, are those that would marry Cordelia. That's what they're there for. There are 2 of them there, and we're going to find out which one of them is going to offer Lear enough to marry her. So that's also, it's part of the negotiation. Now this also strikes us as somewhat distasteful, but in Shakespeare's day, marriage is a political act, particularly for a king or a queen, or the children of kings and queens. They're not given choices. They don't get to fall in love and marry the person whom they choose. Their parents will make a political alliance, and the best political alliance will be the one that results in the marriage. So she's being married off here. That's what's about to happen. Shakespeare would not regard that as unjust or unnatural, by the way, but we might. So we need to check our sense there. Yes?
It's also going to be a great note to the audience of the play in his time, because they would see the significance of France and Burgundy competing for her hand in the sense of the 100 Years' War.
There's that, and yes, of course. There's also the fact that it's less so the case now than it would have been back then, but England and France swapped kings for centuries. The king of France was often the king of England and vice versa. The crown went back and forth. So there was less of a strong sense of Englishness and Frenchness that would make this unthinkable. It wasn't a hostile power. It was just part of...
English nobility spoke French.
Right.
They didn't speak English for a very, very, very long time.
Right. Well,
the Black Prince.
Right. And from the Norman time onwards, right? Norman invasion, 1066. So attend the lords of France and Burgundy, Gloucester. So go to their side, I shall, my lord. And then he goes out. So those 3 figures leave the stage. And then Lear, meantime we shall express our darker purpose. Now the royal we here is expressing King Lear the man and King Lear the king. That's the royal we. Monarchs to this day, when they're speaking as monarchs, will say we. We shall express our darker purpose. Give me the map there. Know that we have divided in three our kingdom, and 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we unburthened crawl toward death. Our son of Cornwall, and you, our no less loving son of Albany, we have this hour a constant will to publish our daughter's several dowers, that future strife may be prevented now. The princes, France and Burgundy, great rivals in our youngest daughter's love, long in our court have made their amorous sojourn, and here are to be answered. Tell me, my daughters, since now we will divest us both of rule, interest of territory, cares of state, which of you shall we say doth love us most, that we our largest bounty may extend where nature doth with merit challenge? Goneril, our eldest born, speak first. Goneril. Sir, I love you more than words can wield the matter. Dearer than eyesight, space, and liberty, beyond what can be valued, rich or rare, no less than life, with grace, health, beauty, honor, as much as child e'er loved, or father found, a love that makes breath poor and speech unable, beyond all manner of so much, I love you. And Cordelia, aside, the thoughts of Cordelia presented in the speech. What shall Cordelia speak? Love and be silent. The hypocrisy of her sister's speech makes Cordelia sick. The very idea of this show of affection on equal terms makes her stomach turn and her teeth clench. And again, it's the very pretense of equality that will not consider the merit, the relationship, the long-standing behavior, none of those things. It's all about a profession of love, but the profession of love on that standing will be only judged on the performance. And because Cordelia is a sincere woman, she will not act. She's not going to be a hypocrite. That's the point. She is true to herself. Everyone else doesn't know themselves. Cordelia knows herself. She will not be a hypocrite. Now, once again, this word hypocrite, with which the Lord Jesus, hypocrite, called the Pharisees, the word for actor, hypo, under, krites, the discernment, the judgment of the audience. Remember, they're going up in the Greek theater, and they're looking down on the hypocrites. These are actors, but they're behind masks. They're the mask of I'm a loving daughter, and she's sickened by this. I will not do this. Go through this sham profession where I'm going to be judged, and my performance just on this stage is going to be the basis for the division of the kingdom. I won't do it. And that's because she's sincere. Now, this word sincere is terrific as well. It means without wax. There's no wax. So what? What's with the wax? In the ancient world, when you had money, you would weigh it up on a balance. And you could put together things that looked like legitimate coinage, but were held together with pieces of wax, so that you could water down the currency. It wasn't the same amount. And to be without wax is to present true, full value. So to be sincere is to be without any fraud, without any acting, without any pretense. That's what she wants to be like. And it's true of her character. She's known to be truthful. She's much admired by everyone, particularly by Kent, who also loves Lear, as does the fool. So there's this trinity of fools that follow Lear around even after he's thrown his kingdom off himself. And they're all sincere, and they will all suffer terribly. But that's her speech. And then Lear, very pleased with the performance, who, as again, he himself is acting here, acting like a king who's doing a wise thing, even while he's doing the stupidest, most foolish thing imaginable, dividing up the kingdom in order to prevent the disunity of the kingdom. What sense does that make? None. Of all these bounds, Lear says, even from this line to this, with shadowy forests and with champaigns riched, with plenteous rivers and wide-skirted meads, we make thee lady. To thine and Albany's issue be this perpetual. What says our second daughter? So he not only divides the kingdom, he says that this will be the eternal division. There will be no unity in the kingdom. It will be a kingdom divided in three hereafter, ever since, based on my decree. And not based on natural progeny then. It cannot be passed on to one person by birthright. It's just by legal or political declaration. That's the point. He thinks that his word overrules natural law. It's totally arbitrary. This word arbitrary, which is rooted in the Latin word arbitrio, or will. It's just pure willfulness, divested of all natural law, of all moral standing. And it's just a declaration of an authority. Yes?
Is Shakespeare hearkening back to the split of the Roman Empire into two?
As in the East and the West? No, I don't think so, no. Well, I see no sign of it in the play.
Because Diocletian also said this will be the eternal, like he said something very similar to this will be the eternal split. It will be split in two for the rest of time.
Well, here it's divided in three.
In the sense of the empire had been split many, many times.
Yeah.
And the first emperor Augustus, that had been four different splits, and he had conquered all of the.
Yes, right, and in general. Whatever you might think of Augustus, there's a hearkening back to that unification act, even by figures as late as Dante, for sure. Right? The Holy Roman Empire was rooted in the pre-Holy Roman Empire, just the Roman Empire. That unit was a good thing. That unity, one law, concord, the peace of the Pax Romana, all that sort of thing.
So could he be saying like, is he showing Lear's even more of a fool than not just for splitting his kingdom, but just for also assuming that it will never. That
his word has eternal significance, and it will say so because he says so. Yeah, well, that's part of the folly. It's pure willfulness. It's a declaration. It's a fiat declaration from the current king who's about to lose his kingship and expects that his word will last beyond his own grave, as if it has that sort of legitimacy, but it's not rooted in anything else other than his arbitrary, willful declaration on the basis of whatever they say, that how much they love him at that point. It's as crazy as can be. But it's arbitrary. There's nothing that explains it other than his own will to power while he's losing power. Okay, so what says our second daughter? Our dearest Regan, wife of Cornwall. Speak. I am made of that self-metal as my sister, and prize me at her worth. In my true heart, I find she names my very deed of love, only she comes too short, that I profess myself an enemy to all other joys which the most precious square of sense possesses, and find I am alone felicitate in your dear highness love. Yeah, if I overacted it's supposed to be ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And anybody in the court there will see it as ridiculous. It should be seen as ridiculous, manifestly so. So over-egging the pudding and overacting is okay here. That's all Lear wants anyway. He just wants, act for me, be the trained seal. And then Cordelia. Then poor Cordelia, and yet not so, since I am sure my love's more ponderous than my tongue. She's trusting in the fact that she dearly loves her father. and is not going to go through this show trial. Now, why would she do this? You might actually ask your question because Cordelia is a wise character. Would she not anticipate that her father would fall out with her if she doesn't do what he asks? She thinks no. She thinks that her love, which he has known forever and a long life, that even when she doesn't speak will outweigh the considerations of equality. That's what she thinks. Right? My father is not going to go through with this foolish act of, if I don't say anything, he's going to throw me out. He won't do that. That's what she's saying here. I am sure my love's more ponderous, more weighty, more heavy than my tongue, because she won't go along with the facade. Lear, in response to Regan, to thee and thine hereditary ever remain this ample third of our fair kingdom, no less in space, validity, and pleasure than that conferred on Goneril. Now, our joy, although our last and least, to whose young love the vines of France and milk of Burgundy strive to be interest. What can you say to draw a third more opulent than your sisters? Speak. Nothing, my lord. Nothing? Nothing. Nothing will come of nothing. Speak again. Unhappy that I am, I cannot heave my heart into my mouth. I love your majesty according to my bond, no more nor less. How, Cordelia, mend your speech a little, lest you may mar your fortunes. Cordelia, good my lord, you have begot me, bred me, loved me. I return those duties back as are right fit. Obey you, love you, and most honor you. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Happily, when I shall wed, that lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. Sure, I shall never marry like my sisters to love my father all. Remember, she can't claim that she loves her father. France and Burgundy are standing there. It's like, well, what sort of marriage is this going to be? She's going to be devoted to him and not to, there's no, right? Are you serious? No. But goes thy heart with this? Ay, my good lord. So young and so untender, so young, my lord, and true. Let it be so, that thy truth then be thy dower. For by the sacred radiance of the sun, the mysteries of Hecate and the night, by all the operation of the orbs from whom we do exist and cease to be, here I disclaim all my paternal care, propinquity and property of blood, and as a stranger to my heart and me, hold thee from this forever. The barbarous Scythian, or he that makes his generation messes to gorge his appetite, shall to my bosom be as well neighboured, pitied, and relieved as thou my sometime daughter. Kent, good my liege, peace, Kent, come not between the dragon and his wrath. I loved her most, and thought to set my rest on her kind nursery. And then to Cordelia, hence, and avoid my sight, so be my grave my peace, as here I give her father's heart from her. Call France. Who stirs? Call Burgundy, Cornwall, and Albany, with my 2 daughters' dowers, digest the third. Let pride, which she calls plainness, marry her. I do invest you jointly with my power, preeminence, and all the large effects that troop with majesty. Ourself, by monthly course, with reservation of 100 nights, by you to be sustained, shall our abode make with you by due turn. Only we shall retain the name, and all the addition to a king, the sway, revenue, execution of the rest, beloved sons, be yours, which to confirm, this coronet part between you. So here's a crown. Pull it in half, and you get half the coronet, and you get the other half. But he's going to be still called King Lear. But you've got everything else. You've got all the duties. You go to the revenue. You've all the influence. But I'll still be called King Lear, and I will have a retinue of vassals around me as if I were a king. So I get to still pretend. I still act like a king. I just don't have any of the powers or the responsibilities of kingship. And you get to have a half crown each and all the power. So this is silly Kent, royal Lear, whom I have ever honored as my king, loved as my father, as my master followed, as my great patron thought on in my prayers. The bow is bent and drawn, make from the shaft, as in you're about to die. Let it fall, rather, though the fork invade the region of my heart. Be Kent unmannerly when Lear is mad. What wouldst thou do, old man? Think'st thou that duty shall have dread to speak when power to flattery bows? To plainness honour's bound. When majesty falls to folly, reserve thy state, and in thy best consideration check this hideous rashness. Answer my life, my judgment. Thy youngest daughter does not love thee least, nor are those empty-hearted whose low sounds reverb no hollowness. Kent, on thy life no more. My life I never held but as a pawn to wage against thine enemies, ne'er feared to lose it, thy safety being motive. Out of my sight. See better, Lear, and let me still remain the true blank of thine eye. Now by Apollo, King, thou swearest thy gods in vain. And then, O vassal, miscreant, swords coming out of the sheath. And Albany and Cornwall, dear sir, forbear. Everybody's horrified. Kill thy physician, says Kent, and the fee bestow upon the foul disease. Revoke thy gift, or whilst I can vent clamour from my throat, I'll tell thee thou dost evil. Hear me, recreant, on thine allegiance, hear me, that thou hast sought to make us break our vow, which we durst never yet, and with strained pride to come betwixt our sentence and our power, which nor our nature nor our place can bear. Our potency made good, take thy reward. 5 days we do allot thee for provision to shield thee from disasters of the world, and on the 6th to turn thy hated back upon our kingdom. If on the 10th day following thy banished trunk be found in our dominions, that moment is thy death. Away! By Jupiter, this shall not be revoked. Fare thee well, king. Sith thus thou wilt appear. Freedom lives hence, and banishment is here. And then to Cordelia, the gods to their dear shelter take thee, maid, that justly think'st, and hast most rightly said. And then to Goneril and Regan and Goneril, and your large speeches may your deeds approve, that good effects may spring from words of love. Thus Kent, O princes, bids you all adieu. He'll shape his old course in a country new. Out he goes. Okay. So it's a terrific, like the scene is powerful. It's quite extraordinary, but as much as the personal, interpersonal aspects of it, which I think are extraordinarily powerful, the themes and ideas of the relation of law to nature are also preeminent here. He says that he cannot revoke it because he's never yet broken his word. He wants them to vow, and yet his law is against his nature. The natural affections that have been built up between father and daughter throughout the course of their lives are going to be overthrown by an arbitrary fiat declaration on the level playing field. And then he says that he will banish him and he will never revoke it because he never breaks his word. He's a sincere individual, in other words. Integrity is the mark of his character. So again, once he says here, that thou hast sought to make us break our vow. So this is the point. Kent has said, stop, revisit the decision you just made. You tried to make me stop doing what I said I was going to do. I've never done that in my life. Which we never durst yet. And with strange pride, accusing him of pride when it's actually Lear's pride that's at risk here. So the irony there. But come betwixt our sentence and our power, which nor our nature nor our place can bear. His power as king and his will as sovereign are connected with legitimacy and with lawfulness. But the lawfulness has been broken by the very fact that he speaks contrary to nature and natural law. That's the issue in the whole play. Just like it was in Measure for Measure, when it talked about the relationship between the law and nature. What's the right relationship of law to nature? Where's the place for mercy in all of this, if any? For Lear, there is none. Remember, this is a pagan setting. He's not going to introduce those sorts of ideas into the play here, as if they would have occurred to the characters, although there is, as I say, one character who does speak more like that, and that's France, but why don't we look to him now? Any comments or questions before I proceed here? I'm sorry, I'm spending the whole time on Act 1, Scene 1. At least as weighty is Act 1, Scene 2, because then we'll get Edmund and Edgar and the subplot being hatched. But yes?
Just a small note that I know
Please.
that there are certain words that are left out
in the brackets or in your text?
Both.
Okay.
So is that just because it was revised, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I said in the very first lecture, I think it was the first lecture, that we don't actually know what Shakespeare's play exactly was. So when Shakespeare finished, there were various versions of his play. Sometimes they were better than others. Some were derived from actors' notes, so you take the part, there's your part, there's your part. Those put together would form the body of the play that came afterwards. Sometimes we have better, but it wasn't like he finished his time as a playwright and then he cobbled them all together and released the authorized version of Shakespeare's works. He didn't do that.
It just seems that there's a lot more of that in this than that.
Yeah, there are. Yes. And so I've read things that are in brackets even in my text.
Right. Okay. So that's just.
It's variations between the manuscripts. Yeah. And what scholars will sometimes do then is they'll debate, is this legitimate or is this illegitimate? That's one question. The other is, what's the effect if this text, if it were included, does it affect materially the way in which the play is performed and the themes and so forth? Is this an improvement on the play? If so, then they tend to include it. But if the idea is to preserve what Shakespeare's original intent was, well, that's hard to know outside of the finished work. And what it was the finished work, we don't have those. If we did, then there wouldn't be the problem. Right? There is no authorized version. It's just, right?
Okay, so just another question. So
Please.
A lot of other plays that we'll read later include a lot more steps or stage direction. And Shakespeare seems to have very little of that. Is that just because of the time, or is it because he expected that they would understand how to act this, or?
It may be in part because he was also involved in the direction. So he doesn't need to write in much direction for the director because he is the director.
Okay.
It's a playwright, and he's going to be there around when it gets performed, so it's going to be able to say that. He doesn't need to write it in the margins for his own sense. That may be one of the reasons, but you're right. There's very little in the way of setting. I mean, there's a little bit there, but not a whole lot, and certainly not a whole lot on how these lines are to be said or performed. It doesn't talk about it doesn't say of one of the actors, crestfallen at this news, Cordelia, and then it talks about her thinking process before she speaks the line. That would be in a modern stage performance. Shakespeare never does that. So but that's one of the reasons why actors like to play it. There's a lot of latitude for interpretation there then. Yes?
Is it the difference between a writer that writes plays for other people to perform compared to a writer that writes plays
to be read?
Or to be read?
I don't know. It's just characteristic of this age. So Shakespeare's not unusual in this. Johnson also has very little stage direction. And you don't get a lot in the ancient...
Did he direct his own plays, Johnson, as well?
Yes.
So is that just the difference then? Is it today's a lot of playwrights are writing for other people?
Writing for other people too. That might be part of it.
Because today they want it to be performed on a very wide...
Right, they want to capitalize on it, so it's going to play in New York as well as London as whatever. And if the playwright wants his intent to be expressed in the acting of the play, he has to give more background to the director to follow.
Today,
take liberties.
Take liberties, right?
Right. So I want to prevent the director from taking liberties with my play. So here's how I'm going to do it.
We'll see Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth from a communist
Sure.
standpoint.
Sure.
Well, that's probably not what Shakespeare meant or wanted.
Probably not. No.
Right?
No. Or wearing Nazi garb and so forth, which I've seen variations on. I mean, the plays of Shakespeare are so famous that they have been presented in various ways over the ages. But maybe that's why they've lasted as well. There's a possibility to adapt it to contemporary. So you can make a point there if you're the actor. But you're right, certainly correct, that there are very little directions about setting and character. The characters just appear and they speak. Anyway, so let me finish this scene if I can. So now, Kent, having just departed, saying that he will leave the country. He doesn't actually leave the country. He's going to come back disguised. So which is ironic. He's undisguised. He's very bold. Remember, he's a loyal subject, but he's also a long-standing servant of Lear's, and Lear would have trusted Kent like no other man. Right, so he speaks to him as an old man as well. He's not a young man. Would without the depth and length of relationship would hesitate to speak so boldly. But there is no other opportunity. There's nothing else he can do here other than to speak so boldly, and he trusts that the long-standing relationship that they have will allow him to speak that way, and it does. And he gives him 10 days to get out of the country, which is a bad, actually, sentence in Shakespeare's day. Exile is not a good thing. He's going to go without. Remember, he has no nationality. He's got no passport. He has no protection. If he's slain abroad, there will be no vengeance for him. He's now subject to robbers and villains, and there will be no vengeance upon them. So he is vulnerable now. You leave the confines of the kingdom, there will be no justice for you. So he's a very vulnerable man, and he's an old man at that. So this is not a kind thing to do, to throw him out rather than kill him. Anyway, there's a flourish of the trumpets. Enters Gloucester with France and Burgundy and attendants. So Gloucester says, "Here's France and Burgundy, my noble lord." Lear, "My lord of Burgundy, we first address toward you, who with this king," pointing to France, "hath rivaled for our daughter. What, in the least, will you require in present dower with her, or cease your quest of love? Most royal majesty, I crave no more than hath your highness offered, nor will you tender less." They've already had the negotiation. You're going to give me a third of your kingdom. So I want to marry your daughter. The terms we already agreed to. I won't offer more, and you won't offer less. Lear, "Right noble Burgundy, when she was dear to us, we did hold her so. But now her price is fallen." The stock has crashed. "Sir, there she stands. If aught within that little seeming substance, or all of it, with our displeasure pieced, and nothing more may fitly like your grace, she's there and she's yours." I know no answer. Stunned. "Will you, with those infirmities she owes, unfriended, new adopted to our hate, dowered with our curse, and strangered with our oath, take her or leave her?" Pardon me, royal sir, election makes not up in such conditions. "Then leave her, sir, for by the power that made me, I tell you all her wealth to France. For you, great king, I would not from your love make such a stray to match you where I hate. Therefore beseech you to avert your liking a more worthier way than on a wretch whom nature is ashamed almost to acknowledge hers." France, this is most strange. "That she, whom even but now was your best object, the argument of your praise, balm of your age, the best, the dearest, should in this trice of time commit a thing so monstrous to dismantle so many folds of favor. Sure, her offense must be of such unnatural degree that monsters it, or your forevouched affection fall into taint, which to believe of her must be a faith that reason without miracle could never plant in me. Look, that final phrase, very Christian declaration. I would never be able to believe in this without a miracle. It would take a miraculous act for me to be able to reason this through. Right? It's like a Christian profession. There's a rational. We believe it. We have a rational faith, but it's based on miraculous things. That was what it would take for me to believe that she had done such a thing. Cordelia, I yet beseech your majesty, because Cordelia, this is her last chance, and she prefers France as well. Always did. I yet beseech your majesty, if for I want that glib and oily art to speak and purpose not, since that I well intend, I'll do it before I speak, that you make known it is no vicious blot, murder, or foulness, no unchaste action, or dishonored step, that hath deprived me of your grace and favor. But even for want of that for which I am richer, a still soliciting eye, and such a tongue that I am glad I have not, though not to have it hath lost me in your liking. She turns to her father. Better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better. Is it but this, a tardiness in nature, which often leaves the history unspoke that it intends to do? My lord of Burgundy, what say you to the lady? Love's not love when it is mingled with regards that stands aloof from the entire point. Will you have her? She is herself a dowry. This is wonderful. Royal king, give but that portion which your... So Burgundy recognized her virtuous character. Like, she's a prize. Royal king, give but that portion which yourself proposed. Remember, he said when he said things, he would never take them back. He's just done this with her. Give that thing which thou hast self-proposed. And here I take Cordelia by the hand, Duchess of Burgundy. Nothing. I have sworn. I am firm. I am sorry then that you have so lost a father that you must lose a husband. Peace be with Burgundy, says Cordelia, since that respects of fortune are his love, I shall not be his wife. Now, she's commenting on what moves him. It's fortune. It's arbitrary. It's chance. It's not providence. It's not a stable good. It's not anything in accordance with the natural law, with the goodness of the world, or the goodness of the created order, or the goodness of providence. Those things do not move him. It's simply fortune. You wanted the money. You'll get what you want. I have no money. I'm not your wife. Finally, France, fairest Cordelia, that art most rich, being poor, most choice, forsaken, and most loved, despised. Thee and thy virtues here I seize upon. Be it lawful, I take up what's cast away. Gods, 'tis strange that from their cold neglect my love should kindle to inflamed respect. Thy dowerless daughter, king, thrown to my chance, is queen of us, of ours, and our fair France. Not all the dukes of waterish Burgundy can buy this unprized precious maid of me. Bid them farewell, Cordelia, though unkind, thou losest here a better where to find. Okay, so I'll conclude with that. Wonderful declaration of love, and it's kindled by the fact that she is such a virtuous and wonderful character. So he prizes her for the very thing that Lear despises: virtue, good character, moral character, character that won't bend and won't count the cost for it. So this is the issue here, and this is the preeminent act of madness, that he throws away the most virtuous, blessed things, the one he loves the most, the pearl of precious price, for the sake of this declaration, this acting by his daughters, and as I say, all injustice breaks out as a consequence of it. So we'll pick it up next class.